Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Nix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Barbara Hess of CCS Medical. Barbara hosted a themed lunch discussion at the North American HR Executive Summit, and she's very generously volunteered a little bit of her time to talk about her topic and how the conversation went. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe we could start off by talking about the topic that you chose, why you chose it, why you hoped it would resonate with HR professionals.
Yeah, so it's the impact that C-level behavior has on an entire culture strategy. So regardless of what aspect of HR that you sit in, we all create a roadmap of getting from point A to point B. It could be culture roadmap, total rewards, it could be benefits. Either way, it's all there to enable business strategy so the organization can make money. I have a background in HR, but I've really leaned heavily over the last 15 years or so towards individual and organizational development. Everything I touch in my life, personally and professionally, has a lot of purpose in it. And so when I think through the impact that HR professionals can have on a business, the quicker we can get there, the most efficient or more efficient ways that we can get there, the better. And so when you think through any of those roadmaps, there's a million things that we can choose and pick in terms of what levers we pull. But really gravitating towards those places where the C-level is actually hardwired, understanding how much C-level is hardwired and impacts how employees experience culture and environment is a big gap that I see a lot of HR professionals miss. And so while there's a lot of levers to pull, keeping in mind that C-level behavior and how those folks are actually hardwired impacts any of our roadmaps, I think is just a data point or a component of information that we should keep in mind as we think through individual and organizational development.
Well, I think that has to resonate with everyone. Everyone is in an organization with someone higher up, and they set a tone, and then that reflects on the organization throughout. I wonder, you put this onto our agenda. Was it something that you thought a lot of people were going to sign up to discuss? Did you think it was going to be more of an eclectic or a niche group? Like, who did you hope would sign up for your lunch?
I actually wasn't too sure what to expect, honestly. We did have full participation, which was pleasant. It's nice to know that something I'm incredibly passionate about is something I could potentially help others to inform whatever roadmaps they choose to pursue once this event's over. But, what's really interesting is the folks that did attend and did participate, they talked about this idea of really struggling as an HR professional influencing C-level, not just on the roadmap, but ultimately the human capital strategy in general. So the conversation went in a different direction, and it was just a lot more broad. But it's this idea of how as HR professionals that we can connect with our stakeholders, because your CEO and your CFO, if you will, are the folks that are making the decisions, both in strategically what you do and financially what you spend your money on. And human capital is obviously the biggest investment generally in anybody's P&L. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot from other folks. We had all sorts of different sizes of organizations, but no matter what thematically, the entire group in terms of what they had in common, everybody just wants to do the right thing and find effective ways to do that. So it was a good discussion.
Now, you mentioned one of the reasons you volunteered it is because you have some ideas that you can offer that help people pull those levers. I don't want you to repeat the entire lunch, obviously, but what were some of the pointers that you wanted to convey?
So when you think through how an employee experiences your values, are the behaviors that are identified by any organization to accomplish your business strategy and ultimately get the results you're looking for, those behaviors are either strengths and opportunities in any environment. And generally those strengths and opportunities are informed based on how your C-level is actually hardwired. The objective here isn't perfection. So when you think through individual and organizational development, it isn't about you have to be perfect at all of those values or those leadership competencies. It's the ability for you to become a better version of who you are. So when you think through the activities and the tactics to inform the roadmap of where you're going to spend your time and your money, it's the ability to understand how is your CEO, for example, hardwired. And currently, the CEO that I work for, he and I are complete opposites. And I met him 15 years ago. And so when I think through what his needs are based on how he's hardwired and the things that matter to him and where his strengths are going to propel our business strategy, that's how I leverage him. That's a lever that you pull. But for me to leverage him in a way through our culture strategy, that's hard. It's more often a way that I gravitate towards getting things done will come off as inauthentic. So when you think through psychological safety and employee engagement, the basic need is trust. So if we can find authentic ways for our leaders to engage and pull on those levers and accomplish whatever we choose to accomplish as a part of that roadmap, the ability to accelerate employee engagement and performance is significantly impacted.
Yeah. I wonder, because you mentioned some of the input that you got from other people around the table was that there are unexpected challenges in that space. Now, I don't need you to name names or repeat anything that you shouldn't, but like, what are some examples of the issues that they're coming to you with?
One of them, which was pretty prevalent, was this idea of self-awareness. And so in order to, every single one of us as humans, we're hardwired a particular way, and we all have our triggers. We have the things that make us happy. We have the things that wear us out. And we have those things that irritate us. All of us are uniquely different. The ability to work with a C-level person and influence their behavior foundationally comes from humility and curiosity and, frankly, self-awareness. And that's where the conversation was interesting, is a lot of the folks that they were talking about didn't have that. And so fortunately for me, I've been in a situation over probably the last 15 years or so where no matter how different the CEO was, I really had an amazing opportunity to work for someone who was humble, someone who was curious, and someone who was really self-aware. And with that, you can do anything, and you can grow from that. It's not about changing them. It's about leveraging who they are. But if you think you're a particular way and you're not, it makes it really hard for that action to manifest itself in an authentic way. So if a particular individual thinks that they're behaving in a particular way and they're telling you they want something else, the ability to get from point A to point B is fundamentally, I would say, impossible, because their point A is in a different spot than reality. And when it comes to human behavior, self-awareness is the key to any success. It doesn't matter how you're hardwired or what your experience is. Your ability to grow stems from having a foundation of self-awareness. And the conversation that we were having was really around some of the folks that they work with that don't have that. So that was a big challenge. We talked about different ways to potentially overcome that.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I can see, yes, that's a real obstacle if you're dealing with a C-suite executive who says they're doing something and they're not, or thinks they're doing something and they're not. You still need a behavior to work a certain way to produce a certain outcome. So what is the workaround there? How do you help them achieve their goal, even though they may be starting from the wrong place?
Everyone has a trigger. Question is, what's your trigger? So in some cases, folks are triggered based on perception. In some cases, folks are triggered based on data. In some cases, folks are triggered by their loved ones. All of us have different triggers. So if I want to influence a path, and the only way to get there is fundamentally agreeing on where we're starting, that self-awareness is achieved through that trigger. So we were having different discussions based on the individuals that they were referencing, trying to understand what those triggers were in an effort to actually overcome maybe some of those obstacles. It's not that it's easy. It's not that it's always possible. But all of us have a trigger and something we care about as humans. The question is, for each one of us, what is that? And really understanding and unpacking what that is so that we can find effective ways to find that path is generally the first step. If that piece is missing, it's really hard to get there.
Yeah. So within your own organization, the example and the message that the C-suite sends, it resonates throughout the organization. Was that sort of the feedback you were getting from other people around the table, or did they join your conversation because they wished they had that and maybe they felt they weren't achieving all they could in the space? Like, how many of them were happy with their organizations, and how many of them were saying, I hope I'm getting some levers from you that will help me achieve these goals because I'm not there yet?
We had a 50-50 split, I would say. The nice thing is everyone participated, and half of the folks were struggling, unfortunately, with being able to influence some investment decisions and their culture strategies or whatever efforts that they were trying to push through the organization. And the other half were really interested in the topic because the idea of how folks are hardwired ended up becoming another part of the conversation. So the ability to unpack the stakeholders that they were working with, not because they have challenges, but because they actually have good relationships and want to become better. So we spent some time talking about that as well.
I've had some conversations with HR professionals where they say, one of the things that has changed over the course of my career is more and more I'm expected to be a strategic advisor to the business. And I feel like a lot of what you're talking about is really how do you have those real conversations with other, senior leaders in the C-suite and say, we need this from you to move the business forward. And maybe they're not expecting to hear that from an HR professional, but if not HR, then who? I think you are the people who are going to say this is going to make a cultural impact. Was that sort of the direction some of these conversations may have had as well, that it was sort of they're learning to do that as part of their role in HR?
Everybody is at a different spot. And the variables that really impact that are your background, your education. You have some very, very, very strong transactional HR executives. You have some very strong organizational development executives. And it really doesn't make a difference where you sit on that pendulum. What matters is that you know where you sit.
Uh-huh.
So when a CEO says, I need a strategic HR partner, you know what questions to ask to even identify if they know what that is.
Uh-huh.
Then, two, depending on what that business needs and what that CEO is looking for, then with the self-awareness you have around your background, your experiences, and what you're able to bring, you know where you can pull some other levers to close some gaps. I will tell you, it doesn't make a difference what organization I work in or who I work for. I don't have everything I need, just based on my own background. HR is such a broad function with so many tentacles to it.
I'm really interested when you say, of course, no HR person has all the tools they need, all the resources they need, but I think one of the things that collaboratively HR people do is bring together the right people and the right resources to address a certain issue. Maybe we can expand upon that a little.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier on the idea of self-awareness, it doesn't matter what function you're in or whether you're HR, you're finance, marketing, or sales. It still goes back to self-awareness. You need to know where you're good. You need to know where you're not. You need to know what gaps you have. And based on whatever that CEO or that business is looking for in terms of human capital strategy, it's the ability for you to sit back and say, A, be honest with yourself, and then B, what phone or what friends do you have to phone in order to compensate for gaps. So for example, depending on the business I'm in, executive compensation is a big opportunity and around shaping the culture and where the business has to go. Executive comp is not my sweet spot, but I know who has that experience. And so I make sure I leverage my Rolodex, if you will, of amazing human beings who have completely different backgrounds than myself, where I can make sure I can deliver more of a strategic solution and a roadmap to a business so we can get things done and make some money.
Well, what a great note to start wrapping things up on. I think it really makes sense that HR people can collaborate to achieve their goals and move the business forward, which is sort of what your themed lunch was about as well, having that conversation. One of the things that I think about with themed lunches is there's only 10 people around the table, and it's a shame that content this good sort of stays in that group. If there was one or two key takeaways from that lunch that you could share with everybody who's listening, what would you want them to understand about some of the things that were brought up and maybe some of the ideas that were shared around the table?
One, understanding who your C-level folks are, your CEO, your CFO, your peers as a C-level leader, understanding how they're hardwired and what matters to them is one component. When you think through being able to, as a human capital strategic advisor, business partner, the ability to influence anyone is based on what they're interested in and how they're hardwired. So keeping that in mind is one thing. And I'm proud of the fact that I also don't lead with HR speak or HR terminology. My style is generally pretty informal. So you either love that or you don't, but it works for me. The informality about turning around and leading with the end in mind, which is what matters to the business. And most people don't need to know how the sausage making happens. They just care that you can actually deliver and execute. So as long as you know the business and you know what your stakeholders, what really matters to them, your ability to help them in your own subject matter expertise and your background becomes increasingly easier. But sometimes we often see the HR folks lead with the human capital strategy and the human capital language and the vernacular. And generally the business doesn't even know what a lot of that even means. So the ability to translate what we do into how it impacts the business. There's an art and a science around it. It's never easy. It's never black and white. But really understanding who your stakeholders are and knowing your business, I think no matter what function you're in, I think are the most important. So you can leverage what your best self and frankly the experience that you bring to help move something from point A to point B, regardless of what that is.
I think those are great pieces of advice to offer anybody in any role, but certainly HR professionals as well. Barbara, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast Series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.